right. This is Daniela Dworshak. Today is February 16th, 2021, and I'm with participant ID number MWKL122. We are working on a project to promote healthy communities for youth and prevent youth violence in Richmond City. Please remember everything you tell us in this interview will be kept private and confidential. After the interview, a member of our staff will remove any names that are mentioned and will type up everything that was said. After the project is done, all the recordings will be erased and you can choose not to answer any question or to stop the interview at any point.
Okay.
And throughout the interview, we're going to talk a lot about youth. And by youth, we mean people ages 12 to 17. And we're also going to mention youth violence. And by youth violence, we mean violence involving people ages 12 to 17.
Okay.
Okay, let's begin. If you have any questions during our interview, feel free to ask me.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so first I'm going to ask a few questions about your background. Can you please state which organization you work with?
Richmond Behavioral Health Authority,
And how long have you worked with your organization?
18 years.
And can you describe your organization and its mission?
Yes. So Richmond Behavioral Health Authority, or RBHA, as many people know it in the community, is the local community services board for the city of Richmond. And we are the publicly funded entity to provide mental health, substance use, and/or developmental services to Richmond City residents. And it's across the lifespan. So we are serving, depending on the program, ages 0 on up to death, older adults. And so our mission is to provide the most quality services and make the communities as healthy as possible, working in the city of Richmond.
What is your title or role within your organization?
My title is the Chief Operating Officer for Mental Health Services.
Mm-hmm. And what are your responsibilities?
I oversee all the mental health services, so mental health services that we're providing to children and families, as well as adults. And the services can range from community-based services, homeless services, residential services, and also case management or other supportive services, as well as therapy. I mean, it's a wide range of services that are offered at RBHA to folks that are across the lifespan.
Mm-hmm. Does your organization provide services and or programs to residents in the following communities? Mosby.
Yes.
Wickham.
Yes.
Hillside.
Yes.
Belmead.
Yes.
Gilpin.
Yes.
Where are your services and programs for Mosby and Wickham located?
So we provide services that are community-based, meaning that we will go to the individual's home. So whether it's a youth that we need to visit in the home or an adult that we need to visit in the home, we also have services that may be office-based. So outside of the pandemic, under normal circumstances, if they need to see a prescriber, a doctor, or a nurse practitioner, they would come to the office to see a doctor for medication. If there are groups that are available that they will be participating in for adults. But for children, we're also serving them in schools as well as in their communities. So I wouldn't say that there is services that are based in Mosby for mental health services. I will say that we do have, RBHA does have a clinic for substance use services that is on the back end of Wickham Court. It's in our Mecklenburg office, and that's for individuals who are working in their recovery for substance use and maybe coming there for groups or other substance use treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, services are provided in the home or they may be coming to the office.
Okay. Do you personally, through your role in the organization, directly interact with residents of Mosby?
No, I don't have that opportunity in the work that I do. However, the staff that I work with are serving the individuals who are living in those communities.
Mm-hmm. Do you directly interact with residents of Wickham?
No,
Okay. Hillside,
no,
Belmead,
no,
and Gilpin?
no.
How would you describe Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months?
It's a public housing community that I think is a very resilient community. I think that they have a number of stressors that they're faced with. And I think the individuals in that community are doing their best to find their way and get their needs met. I think that there are a number of traumatic experiences that they have in that community that they're exposed to on a daily basis that may exacerbate some of the things that they may be experiencing or manifesting in children's behaviors and adults in their environment. And I think also they are looking for ways to better their life. I think that there are great people that live in that community that are really striving and want to have a better life, but may not know the best way to go about that. And so that's where we as service providers and service resources to those families and those individuals to help them develop the best plan to have a better life for themselves.
How is what you shared similar or different to how things have been in the past?
I mean, well, since over the 18 years that I have worked, whether it's directly or indirectly with folks who live in that community, I think that the challenges have persisted. I think that the stressors have persisted, the traumatic exposure and experiences that folks that are living there have, I think are pretty much the same. I think that over the years, the city has, in over recent years, has really stepped up. At least through the Office of Community Wealth Building and some of the other city agencies, to wrap their arms around those communities and trying to provide and offer resources as additional resources. I think also the Richmond City Health District has also stepped in to assist through the resource centers. I know that we have partnered with Richmond City Public Schools to target some of those areas more specifically for Creighton. And Fairfield areas in the past, but we have always had services across the board that are available to any of the individuals that live in those communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What have you noticed about youth violence in Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months?
I will say that youth violence, and I don't know if it's actually 12 months or not, but I would say I've noticed within the past year or two that youth violence has increased significantly. It seems that we're having more and more youth as we partner with, whether it's youth that we serve at RBHA or youth that we're working with through the school system. But there are a number of youth that are either being injured from gun violence or unfortunately being killed from gun violence. And so many of those youth, as I mentioned, are experiencing a lot of traumatic events. Many of them have homes that are not intact, not a lot of natural supports around them or access to resources that some other folks may have access to. And so I've noticed that I don't know if it's the gang activity that has increased. I'm not sure about that, but I do notice that there have been a significant increase in gun violence over the past year or two.
Sometimes our views of communities are shaped by stereotypes. For instance, we may hear misinformation or stereotypes about Mosby or Wickham based on your work and knowledge and interactions with the Mosby and Wickham communities. What are some truths about the communities that you wish were told?
I think I just mentioned them. I think that a lot of times people have tended to think that they are not interested in getting help. that they are not trying to make a better life for themselves. But when you meet the individuals that are living there, they're just like you and I. They just, for whatever reason, have a more unfortunate circumstance, but they want a better life for themselves. They want a better life for their children. The youth that are there don't necessarily want to be in an unsafe environment. They want to be able to sleep at night without feeling unsafe or scared or things like that. They want to have access to additional resources or things that would give them a better life. So I will say that the individuals that are there are they're very resourceful. But I think that sometimes the way they go about getting their needs met or getting resourceful may be a maladaptive way or may not be the most helpful way or healthy way, but they are doing the best that they can to meet their needs and to get resources that they feel like would be helpful to them. I do also feel like they are resilient, that in order to live in that environment, they have to be able to survive and they have to be able to continue to move on. And they have learned the best way that they can to be resilient and to be able to push through the day to day challenges that they are faced with. So I do know that for sure that it amazes me at the strength that many of the folks have that live in those communities that they bring just with them day to day when they're trying to get help for themselves or their families.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about 3 good or positive things that happened in Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months?
I can't, you said the first, can I tell you 3 good things? Did you say that?
3 good or positive things that have happened in Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months, or Wickham.
That have happened in Mosby or Wickham? I can say that it's good and bad, but I think the level of attention that those communities have gotten have brought resources. So even though they've gotten attention for not so good things, for community violence, for things of that nature, it has brought attention to that community and highlighted the needs and the deficits in that community, which then has brought resources. And when I say resources, nonprofit organizations have stepped in to assist with helping to wrap their arms. The Office of Community Wealth Building has developed projects around those communities. So I would say that the attention that have come out of negative events has brought good to that community.
Mm-hmm. And the resources that you shared now coming into the community, how did this impact youth living in Mosby and Wickham?
I think that the school system, and I can speak because that's who we work with more closely out of any of the agencies, but the school system has really worked closely with, I think they have ambassadors for each of those areas that are really trying to be a liaison between the schools and some of those communities. And they have tried to identify some of the needs, work partnered with some of the other city agencies such as RRHA, Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority, also has partnered with RBHA. I mean, many of the youth that we know and also the families have mental health or substance use issues. And so trying to partner to identify folks that may need mental health or substance use treatment, which may address some of the behaviors and some of the issues that they may be experiencing in those communities.
Mm-hmm. And these additional resources being brought in, how did this impact caregivers living in Mosby or Wickham?
Well, I think it gives them additional support. I think that sometimes they may feel alone, that we know that some individuals, not all, but some individuals in living in those communities don't have a lot of family support or family or natural supports that they can lean on or depend on. And so they do depend on and are happy to see community providers that are coming in and offering support to them and helping them to problem solve in ways that they haven't had support with before.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about 3 bad or aversive things that have happened in Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months?
Yes, and so this is where I think it's easier to, which is sad and unfortunate but true, to highlight negative things that have happened and harder to identify the more positive things that have come out. But I will say that Yes, increase, well, the appearance. I don't know if it's supported with data, but anecdotally, it appears to be increased in violence, at least in the Wickham, in the Mosby Court area. Um, I will also say increase not just violence, but deaths among youth. I know that Richmond Public Schools has really been um, just disheartened, sad. It's traumatic to lose and tragic to lose students to violence. So I know that that has been something that they have lost. And I think also, I will say some of the um, movement that has happened in the Creighton area where they're moving some of the residents out of Creighton and into other housing has still continued to breed mistrust of the system. And so some of that may roll over to the other communities, such as Mosby and Wickham, when they see the system not following through with some of their promises or things that they indicated they would work on. I think that the mistrust of the system as a whole um, is something that may have come out of that.
So you mentioned the increase in violence and then the increase of deaths among youth in those communities. How did, I guess overall, how did these things impact youth living in Mosby and Wickham?
Well, I think that that's another traumatic event. I think that um, anytime in a child or a family member experiences trauma, we know, that has a really hard impact on their brain and their functioning, how their view of their community and the world. But I also think that it has increased their desensitivity, that they become desensitized to community violence and hardened to community violence, which can be problematic. Um, so I think also it's the kids, when you have gangs and communities and peers that are pulling a youth in one direction, and then you have schools and other pro-social community activities and things like that are trying to pull them in another direction. That can create a lot of stress for youth. We would think that as providers, oh, that's something positive. The youth, we're bringing them resources, we're bringing them all sorts of supports. But when they have a peer group that's pulling them in the other direction and encouraging them to engage in some of that, I mean, that's a hard position for a youth to be in, and stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned the increase in violence and the increase in deaths among youth. How is this impacting caregivers living in Mosby and Wickham?
I think that caregivers, which we've heard, I mean, constantly feel unsafe when they are living there. Sometimes they're asking us, can they move? Can we help them find another place to stay? They don't want to, raise their children in that environment. And some, as I mentioned, have become desensitized to it, that they're used to it. They don't see the danger in it as much as someone else would who isn't, as used to it or experiencing that as often. So it just depends on the adult or the caregiver. I think it promotes sometimes hopelessness and helplessness when you're living in that environment, just trying to figure out the best way to help your family get out of there. And the more and more that you are exposed to the violence and the tragic events that happen in your community, the more helpless and hopeless that you may become.
You also mentioned the movement out of Creighton into other communities. When did that occur, and how long, I guess, did that for how long?
It's still in process. I mean, it's not concluded. It's been a process, I would say, over the past 3 years or something like that. Maybe 4. I'm not sure the exact time frame. But as they have move people out of Creighton and into other affordable housing communities, they have promised, the initial promise was that they were going to move all 500 folks out of Creighton Court and into other housing. Well, I think they're still working on that for sure, but I think the effort is a little slower than some of the residents had anticipated. So then that may breed a little bit more mistrust of the system. Um, and the residents may see it, although I think behind the scenes, the city is doing all that they can to move the process and the project along. I think that the residents are seeing it in a slightly different way and, cause more mistrust for the system.
And how does this process impact youth living in Mosby and Wickham?
Well, again, mistrust, it may cause anger or lead to anger. It may lead to hopelessness and helplessness once again. I think also when you have folks that are constantly engaged and exposed to traumatic events, you have that fight or flight sense or response that you may have, and you see many times the residents may, depending on who they are, may use the fight response, and you see a lot of anger, you see a lot of, fighting against the system, or you may see folks who avoid it and may flight and engage in other things. So I do think that it has caused mistrust for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have there been any changes in Mosby and Wickham in the past year?
Not that I am aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
What would you like to see changed in Mosby and Wickham in terms of safety?
In terms of safety, I think that we definitely need community engagement. I think it's going to help safety. I wouldn't say a police presence because I'm not sure that that's going to help. They have quite a few police over there now, but I think if you're going to have police over there, take a different approach. Community policing, developing a relationship to really understand the residents, understand their needs, their fears, their desires, their wants, to really hear them out. I also think to have funding, and everything that would need to happen would need funding, but community resources. So being able to provide more I would love to have more targeted mental health and substance use services available to those communities. But of course, that takes funding to be able to do. But I think some of these social needs will then in turn create more of a safer environment. So not just throwing police at the problem, but mental health, safe housing, community activities for youth to participate in. When you think about it, there isn't a lot of community activities for youth to participate in that would be free of charge or low cost. I think also access to employment, things like that, all the social pieces to it would help to address the safety concerns, some of the safety concerns.
Mm-hmm. What would you like to see? You touched on this somewhat, but what would you like to see changed in Mosby and Wickham in terms of positive opportunities for youth?
A lot of what I just mentioned, access to employment, pro-social activities, engage in having more structured supports available and resources that are actually within the community. So not that they would have to come to an office or go somewhere, but we would have a hub there in the Mosby community or in the Wickham community. And, they would have basketball courts for youth. They would also have groups for young girls on self-esteem, on, healthy relationships or things like that, budgeting, helping to transition into adulthood, access to employment, all of those things, mental health services, substance use services, all of those services could be kind of, a hub that would be available in those communities to give them resources and tools to be able to move out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. What would you like to see changed in Mosby and Wickham to create a healthier community?
I think, healthy is not just about physical health, but it's about mental health, financial health, all of those types of things. But I just mentioned some of the resources that could be created and have a hub there for those services. I think financial wealth, building financial wealth, and budgeting and financial resources. I think employment. Also, there's a partnership already with the health department where they're trying to give access to physical health services and supports. Um, I think positive sexual health and sexual activities, all those things would be helpful. And then, of course, mental health and substance use treatment.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that gets in the way of change from happening in Mosby and Wickham?
No, I think the stereotype and the myth is the people, but I don't believe that that's true. When I say the people, the residents, some people may perceive or have a stereotype or a myth that they don't want help, and I really don't believe that's true. I mean, the folks that we see that are coming into RBHA really want help and truly, truly want a better life for themselves and their children. They just don't have the resources or the know-how to go about it. Just knowing how to navigate the system, knowing how they know what they want, but how to get there, I think is the challenge. So I just think definitely bringing those resources to them is going to be helpful and prove beneficial in that process.
Is there anything that gets in the way of change in Mosby and Wickham on issues dealing with youth violence?
I do think that there's generational trauma. I do think that there's generational lack of knowledge and understanding. So it's not just necessarily dealing with the youth, but I think it's dealing with and working, supporting the whole family. I think helping the family to giving them supports and helping the family to develop some understanding and knowledge about youth violence, about gangs, peer pressure, parenting. All of those things I think are going to be beneficial and helpful to address the youth violence in those communities. So I wouldn't say that the parent themselves is a barrier, but I think the lack of information, the lack of resources is the barrier.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you think would help to create positive change in Mosby and Wickham?
I think affordable housing is a huge thing. I think when you have folks who are impoverished that are concentrated in one area, I think that does not serve anyone in that community well, and it sure doesn't serve the larger community well. I think that giving folks hope that where they're seeing resources, they have access to resources. There's an active community plan to help people move along their own paths to better housing, better financial health, gaining employment. I think access to employment. Those are all things that I think are going to help build a more positive community and root out some of the community violence that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that would help create positive change in Mosby and Wickham on issues dealing with youth violence?
Say that again.
Is there anything that would help create positive change in Mosby and Wickham on issues dealing with youth violence?
I think more of what I just mentioned with the resources and access to various services and knowledge and information.
Can you please describe any activities your organization has participated in to improve Mosby and Wickham in the past 12 months?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of things that the city as a whole. I'm not sure about Wickham and Mosby per se, but several of us at RBHO, well, I don't, but my boss does, along with another colleague, participates in the Criminal Justice Collaborative. So looking at how you can reduce the prison to pipeline, efforts. We're also working with the courts to do drug courts. We have mental health courts that we participate in to provide supports to divert people instead of going into the criminal justice system to get them connected with either substance use treatment or mental health treatment. We're working very closely with the schools to identify youth who have legal involvement um, to get them, and they may have some mental health challenges to get them involved in MST services. Um, we also have work with FAP teams, our local FAP team, to get services in place for youth that may be at risk of out of home placement for whatever reason, whether it's because of parent issues, parental issues, or because of legal involvement, youth violence, anything that would put them at risk of moving out of the home. But those are all efforts that we're doing across the board, across the city, not necessarily focused on Mosby and Wickham.
The different efforts that you mentioned, were community residents asked to participate in these different efforts?
I am not sure about that, but I know that the efforts that I've been in quite a few efforts to get some of the residents out of Creighton Court. The effort from the People's Choice Project and moving folks into more affordable housing. They have had the community leaders there that are also residents of those specific communities. They have been involved.
In the past 12 months, has your organization expanded efforts in Mosby and Wickham to improve safety, health, or positive opportunities for youth?
I would say no. I will say that RBHA has expanded efforts by having the substance use treatment services available in the Mecklenburg building, which is right on the back end of Wickham Court. So that is giving access to, well, now that I think about it, I think the youth services may have been over there. So yes, the substance use services for youth, I think was housed at that building for Wickham Court. But since the pandemic has started, they're no longer over there. They're in a different building.
Okay. In the past 12 months, have you collaborated with other organizations to provide services to Mosby and Wickham to improve safety, health, or positive opportunities for youth?
We, of course, partner with Richmond Public Schools. There's partnership with Richmond Police Department through CIT training and other efforts that we're participating with them on. I will say that we are working with, we do have mental health services that are provided in Fairfield Elementary School, in Woodville Elementary School, MLK Middle School. It was George Mason, but what I can't think of the new, or maybe Henry Marsh Elementary School. That's over in Churchill. So I don't know what courts feed those schools, but we are providing school-based services in those schools, which serve individuals that live in those areas.
Are there any barriers to your organization collaborating with other organizations to provide services or positive opportunities for youth in Mosby and Wickham?
Yes, funding. We have lots of things that we've had conversations with other organizations or agencies about. However, funding is something that I think is lacking. I know mental health, a couple years ago, Bon Secours did a need survey along with, I think, another organization in the eastern part of Richmond area, and the top need was mental health services. So we know that that's a huge need for adults and for youth. If we had funding and funding was available, there are quite a few things that we would love to do and really need to do.
Okay. If residents do not qualify for services with your organization, do you refer them to other organizations or programs?
Yes. Yes. So we would look for 9 times out of 10, the majority of the adults that come to, I would say about 80 to 85% of the individuals that come to serve to our area, our organization seeking services will meet criteria for some program within our organization. If they do not meet criteria for a program within our organization, then yes, we will connect them to another um, nonprofit or organization in the community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What employment services are available for residents in Mosby and Wickham?
They have the workforce center that is through the Office of Community Wealth Building. I know that they have the Workforce Resource Center that is, I think it's operated through the state, but it's like one or two blocks up from our office on Cary Street. We refer individuals there. And then if they have a disability and need assistance with accessing employment, we would connect them to DARS, which is the State Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So those are the three resources. Of course, seeking employment, we need a lot more resources than that.
Mm-hmm. What housing services are available for residents in Mosby and Wickham?
So we, depending on if it's looking for housing or looking for furniture for housing, we work a lot with Caritas. We also provide permanent supportive housing at RBHA. So if the individual has, I guess that's for individuals who don't have housing. If they are experiencing, a serious mental illness or something like that, then we would help them find an apartment in the community. If they're living in Wickham and Mosby and they need assistance with housing, talking to the landlord, things like that, there are no resources per se, but our case managers that we have, and we have about 40 case managers, if they're connected with our services, would assist them with navigating in discussions with their landlord, or if they are short on rent and need help with paying a bill or something like that, they will help connect them to a resource for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What food services are available for residents in Mosby and Wickham?
They have a lot of food banks that they will refer families to that are around the community. Also, I would say Catholic charities that they are connecting folks to for food. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, mostly the food banks that are in the area that the case managers would connect the caregivers or the adults to go access food.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What mental health services are available for residents in Mosby and Wickham?
For sure, RBHA is available for mental health services. Outside of RBHA, there are some private providers, but their services aren't as comprehensive. And they aren't necessarily going to serve individuals without insurance. At RBHA, as long as they meet our criteria for the service, we will serve them for most services, regardless of the ability to pay.
Mm-hmm. What positive programs and services are available for youth residents in Mosby and Wickham?
I know that we at RBHA, our case managers refer to like the Boys and Girls Club, Peter Paul, the YMCA, Family Focus, Intercept, Big Brother, Big Sister. The FAP team may also have some resources, Milk and Cookies, to help people stay connected to their fathers who may be incarcerated. The Resource Center, Caritas for furniture, things like that. Salvation Army or Catholic Charities.
What parenting services are available for residents in Mosby and Wickham?
Um, Maybe social services for parenting. Um, and I'm not familiar with any others.
In the past 12 months, have residents of Mosby and Wickham organized or taken the lead on any activities or events to improve the community?
Have the residents of Wickham?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that they have the council. I don't know. I can't think of the name of it, but they have some lead residents over there that may. Um, I know at least for maybe Mosby and Creighton. I'm not familiar with Wickham, but putting together some type of series in the evening for folks or speakers or things like that.
Okay. Was your organization asked to participate, or did you offer to participate in those efforts from residents?
No.
Is there anything that makes it easier for community residents to organize activities or events to improve their community?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Is there anything that makes it easier for community residents to organize activities or events to improve their community?
I think having the financial support. I think, getting people out there to, food always gets people gathered, but that takes money, or refreshments or handouts, information, booklets, all those things. It takes money to be able to provide that. So some financial support that will help. I think also having an agency to help the leaders coordinate that. So having a coordinating body that would help to coordinate that. I think also having some things across the board. I mean, what some residents may be able to do over at Wickham, another, that residential body may not be able to do over at Creighton or Mosby. So having some standardized resources or opportunities available to all of the public housing communities, I think would be helpful, and not just one or two.
Is there anything that makes it difficult for community residents to organize their activities or events to improve their community?
I think the information, lack of information, the lack of know-how, as I mentioned, the system can be hard to navigate. And so if they're trying to bring resources and information to the other residents of that community, making sure that they have the know-how and the understanding of the system in the city and how to access resources. Um, and then funding is going to be the other piece.
Is there anything that you think is important for service providers to consider in working with residents to create positive change?
I think cultural competence is going to be key. I think understanding the individuals, understanding the community, understanding the struggles of the community as a whole, but then understanding the needs of that individual, that family, that unit is going to be critical. That's first and foremost. And then making sure that organizations are better coordinated. I think that each organization in the city does a great job of doing the best they can with the resources they have to assist those families, but there isn't any coordination. And I think there needs to be better coordination at the city level across organizations to be able to help those families.
Is there anything that you think is important for residents to consider in working with service providers to create positive change?
I think information. I think that residents don't always know what's out there or know what agencies provide and offer what. So I think it would be helpful for the residents to have that information. And then I think also how we, the system can build trust with them, because I think one of the barriers to them asking for help and seeking assistance is trust or mistrust. So finding ways to engage the families, whether it's us having a presence in the resource centers that are in most of the courts, somehow connecting, participating in community events, but somehow connecting and engaging the residents there to build trust so that they will come and seek and access services.
Mm-hmm. Who do residents of Mosby and Wickham trust?
I think they trust the people that are closest to them. I think they trust the people that they see the most frequent, that are actually helping them. So if they see that their needs are being met from a specific provider and that provider is frequently engaging with them, I think that trust is built over time, for sure.
Mm-hmm. The next set of questions ask about your opinions of leaders in Mosby and Wickham. And by leaders, we're talking about people who may or may not live in the community, and they have knowledge of community strengths and community needs. They have influence in the community, and they take a lead in helping to achieve community goals. Are there any leaders that are addressing youth violence in Mosby and Wickham?
Once again, I will say Richmond Public Schools, under Jason Cameron's leadership, they're doing a great job with trying to engage youth and intervene with youth who may be engaged in youth violence to keep them engaged in school and keeping their attendance up. I will say that the courts or FAP teams are also working to some degree. I think that there just needs to be more resources, and not that they're doing their best to divert youth from legal involvement and get them connected to some type of community resource. But in terms of naming a leader, I wouldn't say one leader per se. I think it's a collective.
Have any new community leaders emerged since the start of the pandemic?
No.
How do leaders or service providers build trust with residents of Mosby and Wickham?
I think listening, being present, and listening to their needs, their fears, their wants, their desires. I think showing, walking alongside some of their journey and showing them that they are trying to assist and help by offering resources and actually executing on the plans that they've laid out for some of those communities or developed with those communities. I think those are the key things. Bringing resources to the communities, I think, are going to develop trust.
Mm-hmm. Has trust between residents and community leaders changed in the past year?
To my knowledge, I won't say that it's changed. I mean, it's always been rocky, so it's continued to be along the line of mistrust, but I haven't seen where it's changed for good or bad over the past year.
What types of things does an organization do to build trust in the community?
I think communicating out to the community about resources that are available to assist. I think when it goes back to residents feeling helpless or hopeless, but when organizations are communicating, we're here, this is what we have to offer. But I think also personally engaging with that community, so being present in the community, it makes a big difference in building trust and ultimately helping them to access those resources. I think, once again, listening to the residents, so not making the decisions in a vacuum about what that community may need, but hearing from that community about what they feel like they need, and then doing our best as an organization to respond to those needs that have been communicated.
What types of things does an organization do that creates mistrust in the community?
Or follow through, saying you're going to do something and then do another, or not doing anything at all. I think ignoring the community. So it's obvious, and we see all over um, the TV about all the challenges that a community may have, but doing nothing. I think um, putting under resource. So I think putting a resource over there, but not enough resource, is the residents perceive almost like a slap in the face and say, oh, well, we need this, this, and that. And we recognize that that may take 3 or 4 staff or a team of folks to do, but we put one person over there knowing that that's not sufficient. So saying the resource is here, but then you really can't access it. I think also feeding into stereotypes or labeling, I think will promote mistrust. And that's pretty much it that I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, that was really comprehensive. What types of information is available in Mosby and Wickham about youth violence prevention?
I will also say one thing I didn't mention that I should have mentioned, and shame on me for not mentioning it, is our prevention unit. We have a prevention team at RBHA that focuses on not just youth violence, but also substance use prevention. So we do have a team that is working with the city as a whole and some respective schools. And I think that they work with MLK as one of them that is a feeder. Wickham and Mosby feeds into that school. But they're doing a lot of violence prevention work and then also substance use prevention work. So that's something that would be helpful. And then I'm sorry, name your question again.
Sure. What types of information is available in Mosby and Wickham about youth violence prevention?
Yeah, so that's what triggered my comment to say that team would provide information about youth violence. But I'm not aware of any other organization or information that community would receive on youth violence. It may be that I may not be aware of a youth violence team, whether it's with the police department or with the schools or somewhere else that may provide information. I'm just not aware of it. It seems like we need a youth violence coalition or group within the city to pull together and pull all the agencies together and say, this is about, teen violence. How can we pull resources together or put our minds together to develop a plan and seek funding to support this plan? But we need something to be pulled together to address youth violence.
Yeah, definitely. Have you heard of any new programs for youth and families in Mosby and Wickham in the last year?
No.
Okay. What have you heard about family fun nights for Mosby and Wickham?
Oh, I didn't know that they have family fun nights. That's awesome.
What have you heard about the parent messaging campaign in Mosby and Wickham?
The parent messaging? I didn't know about that it was titled that way. I do know that Richmond Public Schools works closely with ambassadors. I call them ambassadors, but they may not be the right name, but it's liaisons that they have between those communities and the school system that tries to get information out, encourages parents to be more engaged with the school system and things like that. I don't know if it's called parent, messaging or whatever.
How do residents of Mosby and Wickham find out about positive activities for their kids?
I think through the resource centers and through the schools, the school messaging, school information. I know that the schools really pump a lot of information out and really work hard to get parents engaged with activities and things like that for the youth. I think I'm not sure if Recs and Parks says how they message things, but I know that the resource center is kind of like a hub for information.
Okay. How does your organization communicate with residents of Mosby and Wickham?
We communicate individually, not necessarily on a whole of sending things out um, to the residents at large. We probably could do a better job with that, but we do communicate individually on individual household or unit issues with residents.
Does the way that you communicate with individuals in the community, does that look different for those directly involved in your programs versus the community at large?
Yes, just what I mentioned that if we're communicating with folks who are directly involved in the program or services, we're going to be communicating about individualized issues and needs, not a community need or issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it is going to look very different.
Mm-hmm. In the past year, have community residents engaged with you or your organization to discuss and resolve issues that affect youth violence?
No.
No. Have you or
Other than maybe our prevention services, they may have had conversation um, to talk about youth violence.
Mhm. Have you or your organization been involved in community conversations to discuss and resolve issues related to youth violence?
Community conversations, not that I am aware of. No, I have a big organization, and there are many people all throughout the organization that may or may not be participating, but to my knowledge, no.
Are there any aspects of positive youth development that you feel your organization is working to address?
Yes, I think early parenting. I think that we have therapy for families that are from 2 to 6 on healthy parenting that are going to address some of those issues. I think also our MST services work with not just the youth, but the entire family for youth who are having some legal involvement and may have some mental health challenges. I think also our school-based services, if we have youth who are engaged in, gangs or community violence, then we are intervening and working with them directly. Could you hold for a moment? I have to answer this. Hold for a moment.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We were just at how do organizations coordinate with each other to address youth violence prevention and positive youth development in Mosby and Wickham?
Well, I think the criminal justice collaborative for the city of Richmond looks at some of those challenges and issues across agencies and looks at the system as a whole to address some of those issues to avoid the prisons of pipeline of prison issue. I think also the city pulls together mental health, social services, Office of Community Wealth Building, a number of agencies to look at not just youth violence, but just many of the challenges that come with poverty, with youth violence being one of them, and how we can best address and get folks to affordable housing and then better communities.
Mm-hmm. Has this changed in the past 12 months, how organizations align with each other to address youth violence prevention and positive youth development?
I don't know if I would say it changed in the past 12 months. I just haven't been involved in those conversations as much in the past 12 months. I mean, the conversations kind of start and stop. I think that's one of the challenges or the downfalls that we have in the city is that we're very gung ho about initiative or an issue. And then we have a lot of meetings, but don't necessarily carry out the plan or execute it. So we've had a lot of start and stops to talk about, not specifically around youth violence, but just some of the challenges that come that are existing within the housing communities.
And what changes are due? Are there changes that have happened because of the pandemic?
No, I don't know of any changes that happened because of the pandemic, no.
What recommendations do you have to help prevent youth violence in Mosby and Wickham?
I mentioned them earlier. I think having more of a community-based focus, a community resource focus, I think that that's going to take a collective effort across city agencies such as Recs and Parks to have activities. We don't have a lot of activities in the city for youth to engage in that are positive activities. Parenting support to help with parenting styles, identifying resources, mental health services. I think that, RBHA does the best that we can, but we need a lot more funding and resources to be able to target some of those areas the way we would love to. I think also having hubs, as I mentioned, within the resource center to have additional resources placed there. I know that the mayor did have the desire to bring mental health and substance use services, but we unfortunately weren't able to get funded for that. But that's something that, building up the hubs and the resource centers there and bringing a lot more services and supports to those communities. And I think employment and housing are going to be huge.
If money were no object, what would be your first line of action to reduce youth violence in Mosby and Wickham?
I think we need youth violence prevention specialists, I think, that can focus and target just on specific communities and work across communities on whether it's gang mediation or addressing problem solving, conflict resolution among youth. I think also having more mental health and substance use treatment for sure for youth and for their caregivers. I think more social service support, and then definitely looking at affordable housing. I think when you have poverty or folks that are experiencing poverty that are concentrated in one area, you're going to see a lot more violence and things like that. So having more affordable housing in our, whether it's Richmond area or Metro Richmond area, that will help address some of those issues. And employment, I said employment too, but employment is a big one. That there isn't enough employment resources to support people to access employment, financial management to have financial health and wealth. I think also having the jobs available for people to access are all challenges that we would need.
The next set of questions are specifically around the COVID-19 pandemic. So think back to March of 2020 when we first heard about it and things began shutting down in Richmond. How has the pandemic impacted your organization?
It has impacted us significantly because the majority of our services now are provided via telehealth and virtually. And I think the ideal way of providing services is to be in people's homes, to be in people's communities. And given the nature of the pandemic, we're just not able to do that at the moment the way we would like to. So it has forced us to scale back the way we're providing services. I think that we continue to have phone contact and face-to-face via, whether it's FaceTime or over some other platform, but that can never replace the face-to-face in-person contact where we're able to be in a person's environment and support them in their homes and in their communities.
Mm-hmm. How has the pandemic impacted your role in your organization?
I think the same way with me working from home. There's not a lot of face-to-face connection. I think when you're having, even in meetings, I mean, because a lot of what I do is not necessarily working with residents and people, but when I'm working with other agency leaders, the sidebar conversation that you may have and say, hey, we're having this need at this agency, or we've been working on this project at this agency. And they say, that's something that we've been working on too. Let's get together and have, lunch, or let's schedule time to talk about that, because I think we both could set up something where it works for both of our organizations. That small talk conversation or side conversation in and out of meetings, I think is lost. So we don't have we're kind of focused on the topic at hand. We have the meeting and then we're done. We log off and do whatever. But walking to the car, or standing outside the restroom or in the lobby of where we are meeting in face-to-face, those are all critical times to do networking and collaboration that is missed.
Yeah. How has the pandemic impacted the programs and services that your organization provides to Mosby and Wickham?
And once again, we're providing most of the services virtually. When prior to the pandemic, we provided a lot of in-person services where the individual, we would either come to their home or they could come to the office. And so neither of those are options at the moment. We're providing a lot of services over the phone. We would do a lot more transporting of getting people to resources. The case managers would pick them up and go to appointments with them, things like that. A lot of that has been scaled back. So it's changed in that way.
Mm-hmm. How has the pandemic impacted families in Mosby and Wickham?
I think it's limited their access to resources. I think also they may feel a little bit more isolated. I think that residents in those communities already feel isolated to some degree. But this has exacerbated that with the pandemic. I think that because the Richmond City system, I think the social services or the human services system is somewhat fragmented and disjointed. It's not easy to navigate when you don't have folks that are walking you and leading you through it as much. It can be more troublesome and can lead to helplessness or hopelessness. So I think it has been difficult in that way, that people feel more isolated and less support.
Mm-hmm. Has the pandemic impacted violence in Mosby and Wickham?
In the beginning, I would say, but recently it seems like it's picked back up. So I would say in recent months, it doesn't seem like it has impacted it in a positive way. It seems like the balance is still there.
Mm-hmm. Has it impacted youth violence specifically?
I think in recent months, I think we're still hearing about youth that are being shot or killed. So no, or even domestic violence. That's a different type of violence, but the most frequent violence that we hear of is gunshots, gun violence. So no, I haven't seen that it's subsided or been scaled back in recent months.
There has been national attention on issues of racial justice stemming from the exacerbation of inequalities by the pandemic, the wrongful deaths of innocent Black people at the hands of law enforcement, and the accompanying protests here in Richmond and across the country. How have these events impacted your organization?
They've impacted our organization for sure. Tremendously, because the majority of the folks that we serve are people of color. I think the majority of the individuals that work at the agency are people of color. And we see all of the injustices that are around us in many ways. And so we have had to have conversations with the people that we serve. I think our CEO has done a wonderful job with acknowledging many of the injustices that have taken place, and acknowledge the possibility of injustices that have unintentionally taken place within our organization, being more mindful about policies that we may have or expectations that we may have, how we communicate information, how sensitive we are, the holidays that we observe or don't observe. Um, those are all things that we try to be more mindful of. We also are in the process of establishing an equity council that will look at a number of things, and in terms of how we provide services, how we're engaging folks, people of color, and then also employment, looking at positions of leadership, to make sure that there's equal access and equal opportunity for people of color. So I think it's made us more aware, and I think everyone has been more intentional to learn, to understand, to develop some insight. And I think that's an ongoing effort.
How have these events that I described, how have these events impacted Mosby and Wickham?
I think they have highlighted what has been happening for many years. I think that individuals in that community have felt to somewhat degree voiceless. That these are things that they've been talking about for years that have been injustices, and I think that they have gone unheard, not just in those communities, but many impoverished communities across the city and the nation, where their voices, they feel like we've been saying this all along and we haven't been heard. And now we have these, huge events that have impacted many people across the nation. And I think that slowly the city and our community is working to address some of those issues. And I think even the state is working to look at criminal justice practices, police involvement, police engagement, um, social services that, funding around the services that need to be wrapped around those communities instead of policing, things like that.
You touched on this before, but if you don't mind sharing, has your organization made any changes either internally or in regard to service delivery to address racial justice?
Yes, as I mentioned, we are actively working on that. I think the first step is acknowledging that there's, potential or possibility for injustices. And so exploring that, creating a council or a group to closely examine that, not just, with employment, but also with service provision, how we're engaging the communities of people of color, how we're servicing them, if we're, how we're welcoming them, how we're addressing their needs, all those things. I think we need to take a close look at, which we are doing. Mm-hmm. Policies and all things to access services and all of those things we should be aware of.
Mm-hmm. What are the biggest concerns in Mosby and Wickham in terms of racial justice and youth violence?
You said, what are the biggest
concerns in Mosby and Wickham in terms of racial justice and youth violence?
I think that once again, policy decisions are made based off of stereotypes sometimes. So I think folks that live in public housing are often stereotyped, which gives them a very unfair start. It's very imbalanced in the approach that maybe I think some communities or some agencies may utilize when supporting or working with individuals that live in those communities. I think that those communities have a heavy police presence, so they are possibly more likely to experience injustices in relation to police. And I think also that group could be mischaracterized for all the violence that happens there rather than looking at the root problem just looking at the violence and then treating them based on the violence, but not necessarily looking at the root issue that's leading to the violence, all the issues that surround an impoverished community, um, the social services and the human services needs that persist there. So yeah, I think that it's highlighted what has existed for many, many years, decades. Um, so hopefully they will work to address that.
Yeah. If you could change 3 things in Mosby and Wickham to address racial justice, what would they be?
I think there needs to be more, as I mentioned, more human service supports and resources and less police intervention. That's my personal belief. That not about defunding the police, because I think that's the wrong message. But it's not. It's retooling, repurposing, engaging in a different way. Um, and I think so that would be one thing. I think also um, given equal access and equal opportunity. So if you were in Western Henrico or the Western, part of Richmond, where you have more affluent white residents, they have access to more employment resources. Their education looks different. Um, their response that comes from different agencies look different. So having equal access and opportunity to different supports, education, all those things. Um, and then the third thing that I would say in terms of racial injustice um, is housing. I mean, giving them access to um, better housing. Yeah.
Would you say that residents of Mosby and Wickham are involved in the racial justice movement?
I think some of them are, yeah. I would think some of them are.
What about youth of Mosby and Wickham?
Mm, maybe not to the degree that they would need to be. I think it's a small percentage, a very, very small percentage.
What would you say that leaders and providers are involved, or would you say that leaders and providers are involved or addressing change related to racial justice?
Yes, leaders are, yes, I think most recently, given the recent events, I think that leaders are working or aiming to look through a racial injustice lens or racial justice lens as we're developing policy, as we're embarking on new initiatives, um, taking everything that we do and looking at it through a racial injustice lens.
So finally, in addition to everything else going on in the world, last year was an election year. How does the election impact your organization?
It impacts it tremendously because, as we know, everything that happens at the federal level, what is supported, what is funded, or what is not supported and not funded, rolls down to the state, which then rolls down to local. When we talk about different policies, funding for mental health, funding for substance use, the financing of mental health and substance use services, um, pumping money into the public service system, all that starts at the federal level. So the election does significantly impact um, the level of funding and level of investment into our services.
What about the local and state elections? Do they impact your organization?
Yes, absolutely. Same. It all rolls downhill. Um, and as you can see, even with the current General Assembly session, they're focusing on a lot more human service related issues, um, whether it's the legalization of marijuana, the Marcus alert, all you can go on and on and on about the legislation that they're looking at passing, it's a lot of it's human service related.
Does the election impact the services your organization provides to Mosby and Wickham?
Yes, because it boils down still to funding. I mean, it's indirectly, not directly, but indirectly, resources to support more mental health services. I mean, we need additional mental health services in our communities, additional substance use services in our communities, and all of that is driven by funding or the lack thereof.
Mm-hmm. How does the election impact Mosby and Wickham?
I think that the people there can impact the election. I think that many times the residents trying to inform people of the power of their voice and their voices through their vote. So getting folks of the public housing communities to be involved in politics to the degree of voting, to have their voice heard, to then support some of the things that are important to them. I think that's it, but I think also the election does impact those communities because once again, like I said, the legislation at the local level, at the state level, is focusing more on human services. If you look at the mayor's State of the Union address, or whatever you call it, State of the City address that he recently did, it's focusing on housing. It's focusing on some of the human service issues that are going to impact residents that are living in those communities, and then the same at the state level.
Is there anything else you want to tell me about you and your organization and current events?
No, I think we've talked about quite a bit. I just think that the biggest thing that needs to come out of this is that there's the service system is underfunded, and to be able to address youth violence and to be able to meet the needs that are underlying causes of youth violence, we won't get there unless we have additional funding and supports to do so.
Is there anything else you think we should know about your organization that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, that is the end of